review Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Tellius is now embroiled in the largest war it has ever seen. Heroes and ideals clash, nations and races tear each other apart, and the heavens bring down their judgment.
I will know that you have strayed from your path, and I will punish your failure, as I would reward your success.
Hey guys, it's me, the Jonin Monkey again. Once again, bringing you the best and the worst of video game storytelling. Fire Emblem, ladies and gentlemen. A while back, I talked about one of the most critically acclaimed titles in the Fire Emblem franchise, Path of Radiance for the Nintendo GameCube. If you haven't seen that video, click here and enjoy. If you have, then it's time for us to cover the sequel to this game, which came out on the Nintendo Wii a few years later. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, set 2 years after the original game. Is this narrative a worthy sequel to the first game? There's only one way to find out. To save time, I will quickly say that most of the good points I brought up in the Path of Radiance review apply here as well. Every soldier in your army has a basic personality that you can empathise with, and death is permanent, so life is not cheap. There are hidden story details in the game, and part of the fun is finding who you need to talk to in order to reveal those details. Heck, there's a ton of backstory you can only see if you play the game a second time. And like Path of Radiance, the game's writing is more grounded than traditional Fire Emblem stories, and a little more thought has been put into the world building and character motivations. However, one thing that sets Radiant Dawn apart is its sense of scale. Whereas the last game focused purely on Ike and his band of mercenaries, this game is split up into 4 parts, following the different stages of the war, and the focus switches between 3 different parties. Ike and the Lagoon's army, Elincia ruling Crimea, and Micaiah leading a revolution in Dayan. They all start out as separate stories, but they eventually converge as the characters are drawn into the main conflict. This gives the story a similar yet different tone to the previous game. Path of Radiance was a hero's journey that affected other nations along the way. Radiant Dawn feels like historical events playing out in front of your eyes, with every small action having greater consequences later down the line. The game also does a great job of building on elements established in Path of Radiance, so when new elements are introduced or old elements are built upon, 9 times out of 10 it feels like a natural progression to the story rather than a forced plot twist. For example, in Path of Radiance there was a boss named Bertram who got almost no backstory apart from appearing after the fall of Crimea. But there were many unsolved mysteries surrounding him, to the point where fans began to throw out theories about why he acts the way he does and who he really is under that mask. Then Radiant Dawn followed up those plot threads and confirmed that most of the fan speculation was actually canon. That may sound like it's pandering or predictable, but it's really not. Path of Radiance is like a crime scene, leaving evidence behind that leads back to the answers if one looks hard enough. And Radiant Dawn is the detective standing in front of an audience and making the grand reveal in a way that is extremely satisfying if you followed both stories. As another example of this, I'm going to take a quick look at Part 2, because whilst it's the shortest arc in the story, it's my personal favourite and acts like a microcosm of Radiant Dawn's strongest elements. This arc is based around Elincia. I didn't get to talk about her in the last video, but she was the Princess of Crimea, and the one who hired Ike to protect her while she gathered allies to save her country. She was sadly trapped in the typical princess character mold: kind, beautiful, wise, loves her subjects, etc, etc. The only big surprise was her suddenly armoring up and joining the group in the last third of the game, but apart from that, she never grew out of that archetype. But in this story, Elincia is queen, and she's learning the hard way that it's not a simple task. Aside from the pressure and responsibility, everyone in her court is second-guessing her, seeing her acts of mercy as signs of weakness. And eventually, one of the nobles starts raising an army against her. This leads to a really cool mission where 2 minor characters, Brom and Nefidi, get to suppress an uprising that's going on in their hometown. Elincia's aides tried to take down the army through espionage and minor engagements, but Elincia herself is starting to crack under the pressure, and her kind nature leads her to try and avoid conflict even if it's inevitable. Ultimately, Elincia's arc is about her finding the balance between staying true to her compassionate heart and having the resolve to fight those who stand against her. Best of all, it's not just a case of her beating up the bad guys, but Elincia making a tough choice and having the courage to stand by it. It's a great story that takes place all over Crimea, builds on what was previously established, and leads Elincia on a path to becoming a much stronger character. A peaceful queen that is still a force to be reckoned with. With all that said, I now want to talk about an element that doesn't get discussed very often. Translation. Whilst the plot remains the same no matter where you're from, the dialogue had some extensive changes made to it in the English translation. The biggest change was the removal of a special feature from the original. If you played the game on hard mode, you got additional lines of dialogue which helped to flesh out the little details in the plot. However, these extra lines were removed so you cannot activate them in other territories. To which, I can only say one thing. Good work. I doubt it was an easy decision to make, but I think it helped in the long run. Okay, just give me a moment to explain. Look, I know I said finding hidden details is one of the series' main appeals, but this extra dialogue was originally part of the main plot, and having seen it myself, frankly it was excessive and unnecessary. Most of the time, it was the character stopping the conversation to explain minor plot points like, why couldn't the king join us in this battle? Or enemy guards asking our heroes a few more questions before accepting their ruse anyway. It's always good to know these details if people ask you about them, but it's never a good idea to delay the plot to explain something that honestly doesn't matter in the long run. The fact that they were only viewable in the harder difficulties implies that even the developers thought the dialogue wasn't that important. So, frankly, with a game this text heavy and a small translation budget, I'd be happy to figure these minor points out on my own rather than sacrificing pacing and money to satisfy nitpickers. The only other drastic change was the Black Knight's revival, or rather, the explanation of that event.
So you are alive. Somehow, I knew it wasn't over yet.
Of course it wasn't over. You were a boy trying to live up to the memory of the greatest swordsman in history.
And yet, I was the one who walked out of the castle that day.
You have your father to thank for that. When you told me that he had crippled himself, I realized that I had never fought him at all. Merely his shadow.
What are you getting at?
I saw immediately that you were not your father's equal, but that one day you might be. So, I did the only thing I could to keep you alive. I let you win.
That doesn't sit right with me. Ike was trying to kill him in that battle, so it's hard to let him win in those circumstances. What happened in the Japanese version?
So, you are still alive.
Did you believe that you could kill me with that level of swordsmanship?
Huh? What do you mean by that?
Let me tell you something. I wasn't the same when I fought your father, Gawain, and when I fought you.
Are you saying you're two different people?
That's not what I meant. But, due to problems during my teleportation, only my spirit and armor arrived and not my body. So my fighting ability was greatly reduced.
Oh man, where do I begin with this one? First, the explanation contradicts itself. Supposedly, not having his body makes him weaker, but as a ghost, he was unharmed after a castle fell on him, so wouldn't that make him invulnerable to sword strikes? Or are you seriously telling me that Ragnar can cut ghosts as well? Second, it was established in Path of Radiance that the Black Knight had at least a day to himself in the castle. Did he never try to fix this? Sir, you can't leave us now! The enemy could launch an attack at any moment!
Your concern is noted, Captain. However, the one factor you fail to grasp is that I'm freaking out! I'm a ghost walking around in armor! I didn't think it was possible to survive without my oh goodness, my body! My unconscious body is lying naked in the middle of a field. Can I walk back there, or will that make things worse? Can it even get any worse? What do I do? 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 What do I do?
On second thoughts, take your leave. We can manage for a bit.
What do I do?
Point is, the translation focused on the spirit of the work rather than the letter, and honestly, I think the narrative is stronger because of it. So, this is obviously a glowing recommendation for Radiant Dawn, right? Well, yeah, mostly. I mean, it has good parts, but there are also these things that really drag it down. Not that they make it bad in any way. I mean, I still really like it, but how can I explain this? Maybe... Oh, comedic simile, that could work. Okay, it's like you have this novel, and it's really good, but it's filled with smileys. No, that one's rubbish. It's like... Look, what I'm trying to say is that Radiant Dawn is a good story, but it's filled with irritating missteps that start eating away at you after a while. I have a lot of gripes, and there's not enough time to go over all of them in detail, so I'm just going to save time right now and speed through most of them. The ending they gave to Ike and most of the Ground Mercenaries was extremely lazy. Mesala's new motivations felt like a massive cop-out, and so did him giving up his nation after everything he did for it. No support conversations means anyone who wasn't in Path of Radiance gets no character development or backstory. The English voice acting was recorded before Nintendo started using LA actors, and frankly it is horrendous.
Oh, no! Chaos, madness, so much anger, so much pain!
Since when did the snowy lands of Dayan also have a desert? Why did you make Oliver a recruitable character? You cannot play a disgusting slave driver for comic relief. Ike being at the scene of his mother's death means nothing to the overall story, especially when someone comes along and mind wipes him. Oh, and this does not sound like a child. Everything wraps up way too easily at the end, and everything related to the Blood Pact is so stupid it's gonna take a separate video to explain why. And to end this video, I'm gonna talk about a very problematic character. The game's female lead, Micaiah. When we first meet Micaiah, she's the leader of a Robin Hood-esque group that fights for the rights of the Dayan people. But she eventually stumbles across Ashnard's son, Peleus, and helps him to start a revolution to free Dayan from begging on occupation. Not only does she start off as a figure beloved by the main populace, she has glorious silver hair, golden eyes, and the power to heal people using her own energy. This may sound ridiculous, but in fairness, it's not all that different from other Fire Emblem protagonists. They need to be charismatic people who can draw people to their cause, because that's the point of the game, to recruit more soldiers to win battles. And whilst the praise she gets in the first 10 chapters may seem over the top, she does earn that praise through her actions, and she is reprimanded later on when her status and bald-headed nature are actually threatening the prince's campaign. Micaiah having unique powers isn't automatically bad either, since A, previous heroes have either had special powers or gained special weapons later on in the story, and B, it's shown that these powers have limits, so Micaiah still has to struggle to earn her victories. However, there are two elements that make Micaiah stand out, which are ultimately for the worst. The first is that Micaiah keeps getting special qualities added to her. Micaiah's inside powers, which are supposed to give vague predictions to the future, end up doing whatever the hell the writers want them to do and lose any sense of limits.
I feel like fog is clouding my mind. Am I losing my powers? No, wait, they're back. Just needed to rest. Point is, this guy's telling the truth, and I'm wonderful.
Then, in the third act, the cast have to break an ancient seal using a song that was established in Path of Radiance. But the Begnion Apostle, the one who's supposed to sing it, only knows the melody, not the lyrics. And then Micaiah just walks in and sings the entire song. She didn't know anything about the seal or the song beforehand. She just walked in and instantly knew what to do. And then it turns out the goddess within that seal really likes Micaiah and deems her worthy of being her physical vessel, eventually granting her more power in the process. Then it's revealed that Micaiah is the descendant of not one, but two heroes from one of the oldest myths in Tellius. The only way this could be more absurd is if they revealed that, I don't know, she was in fact the long-lost sister of the Begnion Apostle.
I am descended from Leiran and Altina. Nisaha, the former apostle, was my grandmother.
This is not how you sell a character to an audience. The reason people like Ike is because he's the mercenary with nothing who gained everything. He had to go above and beyond to earn the strength and respect he has. What can you say about Micaiah? The girl with superpowers who didn't realize just how awesome she was? It's so weird to see a fantastical character prancing around in a world that's trying to be more grounded and realistic. But the second element is a bit more troubling. It concerns one simple question. Who is Micaiah? I made an entire video explaining how the small details in Ike's background explain his personality and show us why he was so instrumental to the history of this world. But we never get anything like that for Micaiah. There are only two things we know about Micaiah's background. She became friends with Sophie, and she is a branded. As we established in Path of Radiance, branded are half Bjork and half Laguz, and thus are targets of discrimination from both sides. Hell, some Laguz refuse to acknowledge their existence even if they're standing in front of them. Every character who has been marked as a branded has led a harsh life because of it. Soren suffered abuse from several foster parents and became emotionally stunted, with Ike being the only true friend he has. Patrine had to spend her adult life projecting this image of strength and inflicting cruelty on others to hide her fear of being discovered. Micaiah, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be affected in the slightest. She's caring, happy, and acting as a figurehead in front of hundreds of people in broad daylight. It's Sophie who has to point out to her that it could be dangerous to stand out so much, and from what I'm told, that only happens in the Western translation. Even when she chooses to reveal her brand to others, they all go, "Oh, that's cool," and it's never brought up again. And keep in mind, she lives in Dayan, the least tolerant country in Tellius. There's conflict and tragedy just waiting to happen, but nothing ever comes of it. The game's head writer, Medea, said that he wanted to focus on Micaiah's charisma, kindness, and human weakness. And whilst they've definitely succeeded on the charisma front, her kindness is incredibly vague and her weakness, well, it's hard to tell what that's supposed to be. She has a moment where she hesitates to act because she thought she saw Sophie die, but it's only mentioned once before being dismissed by Peleus and it's never brought up again. She dislikes Ike before she gets to know him, but again, it's never addressed and only seems to come from ignorance rather than malice. The biggest weakness I could find is the inability to accept reality. She enters a war that goes against her entire ideology, because she wants to believe that Peleus has a good heart and will be a good king someday. But when Sophie points out that he is a crap leader who led them into a war based on racism, Micaiah's only response is to dodge the question. But once again, this goes nowhere. Dane is revealed to have been blackmailed, so Micaiah doesn't have to worry about justifying her actions. And then she's possessed for most of Part 4, so her character never moves beyond this point. That is the problem with Micaiah. She's treated more like a plot device than an actual character. She never gets the chance to grow, change, or face true conflict, so the writers have to keep telling you how special she is to make up for it. Which ironically turns most fans against her. To make things worse, a large chunk of Act 3 has her fighting against Ike, making her flaws all the more visible. And it's not even a case of story-failing gameplay. In terms of stats, Micaiah has the defensive paper and the speed of granite. She stands no chance against Ike, who has the potential to clear entire maps by himself. And if that wasn't bad enough, her army is so badly outnumbered and underleveled you have to rely on NPCs to do most of the fighting for you. If Micaiah had been given just a little more backstory, a little more development, her struggles and powers might have made her a compelling character. But as it stands, she's another misstep in a frustratingly long list. Don't get me wrong, Radiant Dawn is still a really good story and a worthy sequel to Path of Radiance. Its good qualities expand the world and in many places surpass the original, which is why I'm so irritated by the weaker elements. Instead of saying, this is one of the greatest stories I've ever played, I can only say, it's a good story with some bad ideas. I can still recommend this game overall though. There are far worse narratives out there, even in the Fire Emblem series. Shadow Dragon! Sorry, bad cough. I've been the Jonin Monkey, and until next time, cheerio.